The cantina on Nexus Prime was alive with noise and smoke. Beings from across the galaxy filled every table, their voices mixing into a symphony of alien languages. The air shimmered with different atmospheric requirements as dozens of species shared the same space. Neon lights cast rainbow shadows across scales, for chitin and stranger things dot in the darkest corner, where the artificial gravity felt heaviest and the lighting barely reached, sat a figure that made even hardened smugglers look twice. Grexithal was massive, even by Vel-3 standards. His blue Karapachi was a map of warfare, plasma burns, kinetic impact craters, and surgical scars from battlefield medicine. What drew the most attention was what wasn't there anymore. His species was supposed to have 6 arms. He had 3. The old warrior held his drink with surprising delicacy, considering his remaining hands were the size of dinner plates. Each finger ended in a claw that had seen too much use. His compound eyes, once bright amber, had dulled to the color of old bronze. They swept the cantina constantly, a habit that spoke of decades spent watching for threats. A group of younger beings had been stealing glances at him for the better part of an hour. Finally, emboldened by alcohol and curiosity, they approached his table. The group was typical of Nexus Prime's younger crowd, beings who had grown up in peacetime, who knew war only from history feeds and entertainment programs. "Excuse me," said a young crystalline merchant, her translucent body flickering with nervous energy. "Aren't you Brexithal, the war hero?" The old Vel-3 didn't look up from his drink. Hero. The word came out like something distasteful. That's not the word most would use. "We've heard stories," pressed a Reptoid officer, his scales bright green with youth, "about the human war, about the battles you fought." This got a reaction. Grexithal's head turned slowly, fixing the officer with a stare that made the young Reptoid step back involuntarily. "Stories," he repeated. "What kind of stories?" "Great victories," said another voice, a gaseous being whose containment suit amplified his words. "How the Coalition put the humans in their place, showed them they couldn't just expand wherever they wanted." For a long moment, the only sound from their corner was the soft clicking of Grexithal's mandibles. Other patrons had started to notice the conversation, turning from their own drinks to listen. War stories were rare entertainment on Nexus Prime, especially from someone who had actually been there. "Sit," Grexithal said finally, gesturing to the empty chairs round his table. "If you want to hear about the humans, then hear about the humans. But understand this first. There were no great victories. There were no lessons taught. There was only learning, and the price of that education was paid in blood." The younger beings settled around the table, drinks forgotten. Even other patrons had started drifting closer, forming a loose circle of listeners. The cantina's background noise seemed to dim, as if the station itself was holding its breath. "Tell us about the humans, old one," urged the crystalline merchant. "Surely they weren't as dangerous as the stories claim." Grexithal's compound eyes fixed on her, and for a moment she saw something in those ancient orbs that made her wish she hadn't asked. "Dangerous." His mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter laughter. "Child, you use that word as if you understand its meaning." The cantina grew quieter. Conversations at other tables stopped mid-sentence. Tales of the human war were legendary, but hearing them from someone who had actually been there was almost unheard of. Most veterans refused to speak of it, and those who did usually ended up in psychiatric care. "I was first claw in the Coalition 7th Fleet," Grexithal began, his voice carrying the weight of decades. Each word seemed carefully chosen, as if he had rehearsed this story in his mind countless times but never spoken it aloud. 12,000 of the Coalition's finest warriors. Ships that had conquered 100 worlds. weapons that could crack, planets. He took a long drink, his remaining hands steady despite his age. We were sent to pacify a small human outpost in the Outer Rim. The briefing called it a simple extermination mission. The humans had been expanding too aggressively, claiming systems we'd marked for colonization. The Coalition Council decided to make an example of them. A pause in the silence. The hum of the station's life support systems seemed deafeningly loud. We thought it would take maybe to standard cycles, clean, efficient. By the book military action, drop out of hyperspace, demand surrender, eliminate resistance, establish control. We'd done it 1,000 times before to 100 different species. The young reptoid officer scoffed, his scales brightening with confidence. How hard could it be? Humans had barely achieved faster-than-light travel. They were newcomers to the galaxy, primitives with stolen technology. Grex of the less remaining ice stalks turned toward the officer with mechanical precision. The movement was so slow, so deliberate, that it sent chills through everyone watching. That's exactly what we thought. The intelligence reports said they were primitives, barely evolved from their homeworld. No real military tradition to speak of, no understanding of modern warfare. He leaned forward slightly, and the young officer found himself unable to look away from those ancient, terrible eyes. We had reports that said they still fought wars on their homeworld with kinetic weapons, bullets, and explosives, chemical propellants. The kind of primitive warfare that civilized species had abandoned millennia ago. But you're here, observed the gaseous being, its voice echoing strangely from its containment suit. So you survived. The word hit Grexithal like a physical blow. His karapachi seemed to darken, and for a moment his remaining arms trembled. Survived. The word seemed to cause him physical pain. Yes, I survived. Out of 12,000 coalition soldiers in my fleet, maybe 300 made it home. And of those 300, most refused to ever speak of what happened. The gathering leaned closer, drawn by morbid fascination. Round them, the cantina had grown almost completely silent. Even the bartender had stopped cleaning glasses to listen. The target was a mining colony on a world they called New Sol. Population maybe 50,000. Miners, engineers, support staff. Families. His voice caught slightly on the last word. Our fleet carried enough firepower to glass the entire planet. We jumped into the system expecting token resistance. Maybe a few civilian ships trying to evacuate. Maybe some hastily armed cargo haulers. Grexithal's voice dropped to barely above. A whisper, but in the silence of the cantina, every word carried clearly. What we found instead was hell itself waiting for us. Commander Yull was everything the Coalition military prized in a leader, 3 meters tall, with the kind of presence that made entire star systems surrender without firing a shot. His flagship, the Eternal Dominance was a monument to Coalition power. A kilometer of death and destruction wrapped in armor plating that could withstand the core of a star. Commander Yull approached the planet with standard intimidation formation. Grexithal continued, his scarred hands trembling slightly as he spoke. The memory was playing behind his eyes like a vid screen he couldn't turn off. 12 dreadnoughts, ranged in perfect attack formation, each one capable of cracking a moon in half. 40 cruisers spread in supporting positions, their weapon arrays locked and loaded. Over 100 support vessels, troop transports, fighters, supply ships. Enough firepower to subjugate most star systems. The cantina was dead silent now. Even the background hum of the station systems seemed muted, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The formation was beautiful, in its way, Grexithal admitted, his voice carrying a note of professional appreciation. Textbook perfect, every ship in exactly the right position to deliver maximum psychological impact. when that many coalition vessels drop out of hyperspace above your world. Most species just give up. Smart ones, anyway. He paused, his compound, eyes focusing on something far beyond the cantina walls. We broadcast the standard surrender demand on all frequencies, 47 different languages, including the primitive human tongues. The message was simple. Lay down your arms, prepare for pacification, and your deaths will be quick. Standard coalition protocol. Expected immediate capitulation. The old warrior's mandibles clicked once, sharply. Instead, we got a response. From someone called Captain Day. Single transmission, broadcast on an open channel so every ship in our fleet could hear it. His exact words were, "Come and take it." A nervous laugh rippled through the younger aliens. The phrase seemed almost comical in its simplicity, a primitive response to overwhelming technological superiority. We didn't understand the reference then. Grexithel continued, his voice growing darker. It was from their ancient history. Warriors who preferred death to surrender, Spartans at Thermopylae, Texans at the Alamo, Koreans at Imjin River, names. That meant nothing to us then. We should have paid attention to that warning. He took a long drink, and when he continued, his voice had changed. There was something in it now that made the younger beings shift uncomfortably in their seats. Commander Yal was amused, actually amused. I remember him laughing on the bridge. That deep rumbling sound his species makes when they find something particularly funny. Primitives, he said. They think courage can stop plasma cannons. He ordered the bombardment to begin. Grexithel's voice hardened like cooling metal. Standard orbital strikes to break their will. Precise. Calculated shots designed to destroy military targets while leaving the infrastructure intact. 12 dreadnoughts opened fire simultaneously, their main guns painting the void with streams of superheated plasma. Enough energy to boil oceans, directed at what should have been defenseless targets. He paused, lost in the memory of that moment when everything changed. But as our first wave of plasma charges descended toward the planet's surface, something impossible happened. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. The charges never reached the surface. They were intercepted, not by shields, not by energy barriers, but by kinetic projectiles launched from the planet. Crude metal slugs, some no bigger than my fist, moving at incredible velocity. A young Reptoid officer leaned forward. That's impossible. Kinetic weapons can't intercept plasma charges. The timing alone. Tell that to the humans. Grexithel cut him off. Somehow, they had calculated the trajectory of every shot before. We fired it. Their computers, primitive as they were, had run the numbers and positioned their interceptors perfectly. The old warrior's remaining hands clenched into fists. We watched our bombardment get swatted out of the sky like insects. Trillions of credits worth of firepower, negated by mining equipment. The humans had turned their entire mining operation into a planetary defense system. Every ore processor, every heavy lifter, every industrial facility, all converted into weapons. The cantina patrons exchanged glances. This wasn't how the stories usually went. Coalition forces were supposed to be unstoppable. That's when Captain Hume's voice came over the comm channels. Grexithel's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, clear as starlight. Broadcast on our own military frequencies. Somehow they had cracked our communications. His words were simple. You want our world. Come down and take it from us. The veteran's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of deep distress in his species. Commander Yal was beyond furious. No primitive species had ever defied coalition forces so boldly. No one had ever shot down a coalition bombardment in 3 centuries of conquest. It had never happened. Not once. Grexithel's remaining eye. Stalks swiveled. taking in the faces round him. He ordered a full assault landing. 2,000 of our best shock troops in atmospheric assault craft, the most elite soldiers in the coalition military, equipped with the finest weapons and armor our technology could provide, each one worth 10 ordinary soldiers. The old warrior's gaze fixed on a point beyond the cantina walls, as if he could see through the station's hull to the battle that had changed everything. I was leading the third wave, Assault Craft Retribution *, carrying 200 Veltri shock troops as we descended through the atmosphere. Our sensors showed us what looked like empty mining tunnels, perfect landing zones, no heat signatures, no energy readings. The humans had apparently retreated underground. His voice became distant, hollow. I watched the first wave disappear into those tunnels, 200 craft, each carrying a full squad of elite troops. They landed perfectly, deployed according to protocol, and advanced into the tunnel system in perfect formation. The silence stretched until someone finally whispered, "What happened?" Then the screaming started over the comm channels. The words hit the listeners like a physical blow. Several of the younger aliens actually flinched. Not battle cries, not war shouts, screaming, terror, confusion. Our soldiers were calling for backup, for medics, for extraction. But their transmissions were chaotic, panicked. Nothing like the disciplined communications we'd trained for. Grexithal's hands were shaking visibly now. The humans had turned the entire tunnel system into a maze of death. They'd rigged mining explosives throughout the underground network. Not randomly, but strategically. But they didn't just blow it up. They waited. They let our troops go deep, spreading out through the tunnels according to standard search patterns. He paused, gathering himself. Then they collapsed specific sections, not all at once, not randomly. Precise demolitions that trapped our forces in small groups, cutting off retreat routes and communication relays. 2,000 elite soldiers, suddenly broken into isolated squads of 10 or 20, lost in a dark maze they didn't understand. The old warrior's voice became hollow, empty. Then they hunted us in the dark underground. On their terms, a crystalline merchant whispered, "But surely your troops had superior equipment. Equipment means nothing when you can't see your enemy." Grexithal cut her off. The humans knew every tunnel, every passage, every hiding spot. They moved through their own mining network like ghosts. His compound eyes unfocused as the memories took hold. I remember Sergeant Jin's voice over the comm. He wasn't issuing orders. He was giving locations. Squad 2, Northeast Tunnel, 3 hostiles, just comm. Professional killing instructions, like he was directing traffic. Grexithal took another drink, his hands shaking more noticeably. By the time the second wave arrived, the first wave was gone. Not retreated, not captured, gone. We found some bodies later, after we finally fought our way out. Our soldiers had been killed with mining tools, primitive weapons, hammers, cutting, torches or processors. He looked up at his audience, and they saw something in his eyes that made them wish they had never asked. But the humans wielded them with surgical precision. Every wound was exactly where it needed to be. No wasted motion, no unnecessary violence. Just efficient, professional killing. The Cantino remained silent as the weight of his words settled over them like a shroud. The third day on New Sol dawned red through the smoke and dust of battle. Grexithal remembered the dawn clearly. How the light filtered through the destroyed atmosphere processes, painting everything the color of blood. By then, they had learned that humans didn't sleep the way other species did. They took turns, resting. But someone was always watching, always planning. The real horror began on the third day. Grexithal continued. his voice barely audible. The cantina was so quiet now that his whispered words carried to every corner. We'd managed to secure a small section of the mining complex. Took us 48 hours of constant fighting to claim maybe 2 square kilometers of ground. Commander Yaul was convinced we just needed more firepower, more troops. He was wrong. The veteran-scarred Karapochi seemed to darken as he spoke, the blue fading to something almost black. Commander Yaul called for reinforcements, another full battle group, 6 more dreadnoughts. 20 cruisers for 1,000 fresh troops, the kind of force that could conquer entire systems. But by then, something had changed in the way the humans fought. They weren't just defending anymore, they were hunting. Rex of the less remaining hands traced patterns on the table's surface, as if drawing invisible maps. That's when we learned about human pack behavior. We'd studied their psychology. Of course, standard coalition intelligence gathering. We knew they formed social bonds, had family structures. But we thought we understood what that meant. We were wrong. He paused, his compound eyes reflecting the cantina's dim lighting like broken mirrors during our assault on Processing Station 7. One of our plasma rifles took down a human soldier, a young female named Nara. I remember her name because what happened next changed everything we thought we knew about warfare. The old warrior's voice became mechanical. As if he were reading from a combat report, she was clearly dying. Plasma burns across 60% of her body, internal injuries that would have killed most species instantly. She had minutes left, maybe seconds. Any rational military force would have written her off as a casualty and moved on. Rex of the less compound eyes unfocused as he relived the memory. Any rational species would have left her. Tactically sound decision. One soldier, already dying. Not worth risking others. But these weren't rational beings we were fighting. The young Reptoid officer leaned forward, his scales flickering with curiosity. What did they do? 3 human squads, nearly 60 soldiers, abandoned their defensive positions to reach her. They left cover, exposed themselves to our fire, and fought through our entire perimeter. Lost 30 of their own people just to get to one dying comrade. The old warrior's mandibles clicked rapidly, the sound like breaking glass. I was positioned on the ridge overlooking the station, perfect sniper's nest, clear view of the entire battlefield. I watched it all happen through my scope, watched them throw away every tactical advantage they had. His voice grew distant, hollow. A human Coleman reached her first. Massive explosion had knocked him down twice, but he kept crawling. Plasma fire was so thick it lit up the air around him. He scooped her up and started running. I had him in my sights. Perfect shot. But something made me hesitate. Rex of the less remaining arm trembled as he reached for his drink. He took 3 plasma shots to his torso, but kept moving, kept carrying her. His combat armor was melting. His skin was burning. But he didn't drop her. When he finally collapsed, another human, Sol, I think his name was, picked up both Min and Nara and continued the evacuation. That makes no tactical sense, observed the gaseous being. Its voice echoing strangely from its containment suit. Exactly. Rex of the less voice cracked like breaking stone. It makes no sense. Every military manual in the galaxy says you don't throw away 60 soldiers to save one dying fighter. But they did it anyway. They saved her. Somehow. We found out later there. Medics had managed to stabilize her in some underground bunker. The veteran leaned forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the table. But here's what really terrified us. After that rescue, everything changed. The human attacks became personal. They started targeting our medics, our supply lines, our command structure. Not random terrorism, surgical strikes based on perfect intelligence. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than a shout. Someone called Commander Wu started broadcasting our patrol routes before we even planned them. He would come on our communication channels and calmly announce where our next assault would be, what time we would arrive, how many troops we were bringing. They knew where we were going before we did. The younger aliens exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't how wars were supposed to work. We realized they weren't just fighting us. They were studying us. Every engagement, every battle, every casualty. It was all data to them. They learned our patterns, our weaknesses, our fears, every time we fought them. They got better at killing us. Grex, the less remaining on, gestured weakly at the air, as if trying to grasp something that kept slipping away. The breaking point came on the 5th day. We were conducting a routine sweep of the southern tunnels when Captain Ian's voice echoed through the entire complex of our own communication system. He'd somehow hacked our networks, taken control of our speakers, our displays, everything. The old warrior's voice became barely audible. His message was simple. You hurt our family. Now we hurt you. The cantina had grown so quiet that the hum of the station's life support systems seemed deafening. Other patrons had stopped even pretending to drink, their attention fixed on the old warrior's words. That night, humans infiltrated our main camp, not to plant bombs or steal supplies. They came to rescue their wounded, the ones we'd captured for interrogation. Grexithal's compound eyes closed, as if he couldn't bear to see the memory playing. Behind them, our detention center was supposed to be impregnable. Energy barriers, automated defenses, 200 guards. The humans went through it like it was made of paper. They fought their way in, retrieved every single human prisoner, and fought their way back out. He opened his eyes, and the listeners saw something in them that made their blood run cold. The casualties they took should have been prohibitive. We killed 47 humans that night. 47 soldiers dead to rescue maybe 20 prisoners. But they didn't care. They just kept coming. The old warrior's voice became a whisper. The last thing I heard before they disappeared back into the tunnels was someone, might have been Commander Wu himself, saying nobody gets left behind, like it was some kind of sacred oath. Grexithal looked round the table at the faces of his listeners. That's when I finally understood what we were really fighting. Not soldiers, not even warriors. We were fighting something that had never existed in the galaxy before. We were fighting family. The silence that followed was complete and absolute. Every human on that planet was connected to every other human in ways we couldn't comprehend. Hurt one, and you hurt them all. Threaten one, and they all become your enemy. Kill one, and they all become your nightmare. The old warrior's mandibles clicked once. It sounded like a death knell. We weren't fighting a military force. We were fighting love itself, armed and organized and absolutely, completely without mercy. By the 7th day of battle, the coalition fleet hung in orbit like a collection of wounded beasts. What had started as a demonstration of overwhelming power had become a grinding nightmare that consumed soldiers and equipment at an impossible rate. Commander Yull had stopped sleeping. His massive frame hunched over tactical displays that showed nothing but bad news. By the end of the first week, Commander Yull was desperate. Grexithal continued, his voice hollow with remembered horror. We'd lost nearly half our ground forces, and the humans showed no signs of weakening. If anything, they seemed to be getting stronger. The old veteran stared into his drink as if seeking answers in its depths. The liquid had gone flat hours ago, but he continued to nurse it like a lifeline. Every day brought new reports of impossible things. Human soldiers who kept fighting with injuries that should have killed them. Supply convoys that vanished without a trace, only to have their weapons appear in human hands days later. communications that were compromised almost before we sent them. Grexitheless compound eyes tracked across the cantina, but he wasn't seeing the present anymore. Commander Yull called a council of war. All the senior officers gathered in the flagship's briefing room. I remember that meeting clearly because it was the first time I saw fear in the commander's eyes. Real fear. The old warrior's mandibles clicked softly. He stood at the head of the table, this massive figure who had conquered star systems, and his hands were shaking. We underestimated them, he said, simple words. But coming from him, they were like admitting defeat. Grexithel paused, his scarred hands tracing invisible patterns on the table. The casualty reports were spread out before us. 12,000 coalition troops had become 6,000 in 7 days. Not just wounded, gone, vaporized, captured, or simply missing. Our medical facilities were overwhelmed. Our supply lines were chaos. Morale was non-existent. The cantina patrons leaned closer, drawn by the raw honesty in the veteran's voice. That's when the commander made the decision that would haunt us all. He looked round that table at his remaining officers and said words I'll never forget. If we can't take it intact, we'll make sure they can't have it either. The young crystalline merchant shifted uncomfortably. Surely that ended the resistance. Grexithel's laugh was bitter and broken, like glass grinding against stone. Child. That's when the real nightmare began. He looked up at his audience, his compound eyes reflecting decades of trauma. The orbital bombardment order went out at 08:00 hours, ship time. Every vessel in the fleet capable of surface bombardment began charging their main weapons. Dreadnoughts, cruisers, even the smaller destroyers. Everything we had. The old warrior's voice became mechanical, as if he were reading from an official report. The bombardment lasted 6 hours. Continuous fire from orbit. We turned the surface into molten glass. Every structure, every tunnel entrance, every possible hiding place, obliterated. The planet's surface reached temperatures that could melt titanium. It looked like the inside of a forge. He paused, his remaining hands clenching. Into fists. I watched it from the observation deck of my transport. Watched the planet burn. Watched 50,000 human lives get erased in streams of superheated plasma. The light was so bright it hurt to look at, even through the filters. The silence stretched until the young reptoid officer prompted, and 3 days later, humans started attacking our orbital positions. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a single being in the cantina moved or spoke. Impossible, whispered the gaseous being, its voice barely audible through its containment suit. That's what we thought. Our sensors showed nothing. No ships, no missiles, nothing that could threaten a space-based fleet. The planet below was dead, a ball of cooling glass and ash. But our outer perimeter vessels started going dark, one by one. Grexithel's mandibles clicked in distress, the sound like breaking bones. The first ship we lost was the cruiser Dominance *. Captain Vextar was a friend of mine, a good officer with 30 years of experience. His ship just stopped responding. No distress signal, no explosion, nothing. 1 minute it was there, the next minute it was drifting dead in space. The veteran's voice became strained, as if each word cost him something precious. We found it 18 hours later, hull breached in 17 places, but not by weapons fire, by tools, mining equipment, welding torches, emergency cutters. The kind of industrial equipment you'd find on any mining station. He took a shaky drink, his hands trembling visibly. Inside, we found the crew, all 800 of them, dead. But they hadn't been killed by explosions or energy weapons. They'd been killed by humans in mining suits, moving through the ship's corridors like they owned them, How did they get aboard? The question came from several voices at once. We never found out. Not completely. The humans had somehow survived the orbital bombardment, something that should have been impossible, and found a way to reach our ships. Later intelligence suggested they'd use mining pods. Small and shielded craft that our sensors had dismissed. As debris, Grexithal's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But the worst part wasn't the attacks. It was the messages they left behind, scratched into bulkhead walls with mining tools. Written in their own blood sometimes, names, the names of every human who had died in the bombardment. The old warrior began reciting, his voice taking on the cadence of a funeral prayer. Private June, age 19. Corporal High, mother of 3. Sergeant Bien, 22 years old. Engineer, survived the colony ship crash. Minor Bok, worked the deep tunnels. Dr. Chol, delivered babies, his compound eyes closed as the litany continued. Hundreds of names. They made sure we knew exactly who we'd killed, not just soldiers, families, children, grandparents, people who had never held a weapon in their lives. The cantina was so quiet that the hum of distant machinery seemed like thunder. Then came the voice transmissions, a human called Colonel Tai, broadcasting on our emergency frequencies. He didn't make threats. He didn't rage or curse. He just stated facts. Grexithal's voice became mechanically precise, as if quoting from memory burned into his mind. You killed our families. You destroyed our homes. You turned our world into glass. We understand. This is what war means to you. Let us show you what war means to us. The cantina's patrons shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of how small and fragile their own lives seemed. That night, 7 more ships went dark. The humans had somehow organized coordinated strikes across our entire fleet. Small teams, moving through space in salvaged equipment, turning our own vessels into tombs. Grexithal opened his eyes and looked round the table. We were no longer fighting a war. We were being hunted by ghosts who had nothing left to lose, and all the time in the universe to make us pay for what we'd done. The old warrior's voice became barely audible. And the terrible thing was, we knew they were right. We had started this. We had come to their world. We had killed their families. Everything that happened next, we had earned. The month that followed became known in coalition records as the Bleeding. Every morning brought news of another ship lost, another crew found dead, another impossible attack carried out by humans who should not have existed anymore. The fleet that had once numbered over 100 vessels was shrinking daily, and morale had collapsed completely. The siege lasted another month, Grexithal said, his voice now barely a whisper. Every day, we lost more ships. The humans never demanded surrender, never offered terms. They just kept killing us. The old warrior's remaining eye stalks drooped, with exhaustion, as if the weight of the memories was physically crushing him. By the 3rd week, we were no longer a military force. We were survivors huddled in metal shells, waiting for a death to find us. The humans had turned space itself into their weapon. They moved between our ships like phantoms, appearing where they couldn't possibly be, striking where we least expected. Grexithal's scarred hands traced patterns on the table that looked like ship formations. I remember Captain Velter's final transmission from the destroyer Relentless *. He was screaming about humans materializing inside his ship's engine room. They're everywhere. He kept saying, how are they everywhere? They're nothing but static. The cantina patrons found themselves looking over their shoulders, as if the darkness might suddenly produce vengeful human spirits. Commander Yell had stopped giving orders by then. He just sat in his command chair, staring at the tactical display as red markers disappeared one by one. Each marker represented hundreds of lives. Ships worth more than most planets. Technology that took decades to develop. The old warrior's voice became distant, hollow. The humans had perfected a new kind of warfare. They didn't need massive fleets or planet-killing weapons. They had something more powerful. They had become death itself. Patient and inevitable and absolutely unstoppable. Grexithel paused, his compound eyes reflecting the cantina lighting like broken stars. Commander Yol finally broke when they took the flagship. Not destroyed. Took. The asterisk eternal dominance asterisk. Pride of the coalition fleet simply went silent. During the 4th week, no explosion, no distress signal. One moment it was there, the next it was gone from our senses. The young Reptoid officer leaned forward. What happened to the commander? We found the ship 3 days later, drifting at the edge of the system. Every coalition soldier aboard was dead, all 3,000 crew members, but the ship was intact, fully operational. Power systems running, life support functioning, weapons charged. Grexithel's mandibles clicked once, sharply. We found Commander Yell in his command chair, alive and harmed. The humans had left him there with a message burned into the main display screen with laser cutters. The veteran struggled to continue, his voice breaking. This is what happens when you declare war on our family. Learn from his example. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant hum of the station's machinery. Below that message, they'd listed every human casualty from the orbital bombardment, all 50,000 names, and under each name, they'd written where that person was from on their homeworld, their occupation, their family members. Grexithel's voice became barely audible. Minor J from Seoul District survived 3 cave-ins, father of twin daughters. Dr. Song from Bizen Sector delivered over 200 babies, loved classical music. Engineer Park from the Northern Territories designed the water recycling systems. Grandmother to 6 children, the old warrior's remaining hands trembled. As he spoke, they wanted us to understand that we hadn't just killed enemy combatants. We'd murdered their entire civilization on that world. Every teacher, every parent, every child. Every dream and hope and future that had existed on New Seoul. Grexithel reached into his pouch and withdrew a small object, a simple braided cord with a metal disc attached. The craftsmanship was crude but careful. Made by hands that had taken time despite everything. The surviving humans could have killed. Commander Yao could have tortured him, could have made him suffer the way their families had suffered. Instead, they gave him this. He held up the object, and the gathering could see crude symbols etched into the metal disc with painstaking care. It's called a friendship bracelet, a human tradition. The symbols spell out "Remember us." The old warrior's voice cracked completely. The human who gave it to him was Lieutenant Kim. Her entire family had died in the bombardment. Her parents, her children, her siblings, everyone she'd ever loved, turned to ash in our attack. The young crystalline merchant's voice was filled with disbelief, and she gave this to her enemy. Not her enemy. That's what we finally understood. Grexithel placed the bracelet on the table where everyone could see it. Lieutenant Kim told Commander Yo that the war was over, not because we'd won or lost, but because she was tired of killing people who didn't understand what they were fighting. The veteran looked round the table, his ancient eyes meeting each of theirs. She explained that humans don't fight for territory or resources or ideology. They fight for each other. When we destroyed New Seoul, we didn't eliminate a military target. We murdered their family. The weight of that revelation settled over the cantina like a physical presence. The coalition withdrew from human space. The next day, official records call it a strategic repositioning. The truth is, we ran. We ran because we finally understood what we were dealing with. Grexithel's voice grew stronger, more certain. Humans aren't just another species with advanced weapons. They're a force of nature. They'll sacrifice everything. Their ships, their worlds, their own lives, to protect the people they love. The old warrior stood slowly, his scarred body moving with obvious pain. The most terrifying thing about humans isn't their capacity for violence. It's their capacity for loyalty. They'll follow you into the depths of space, fight impossible odds, die for complete strangers, all because they've decided you're family. He picked up the bracelet and tucked it back into his pouch. 3 years after the war ended, Lieutenant Kim sent me a message. She'd somehow tracked down my personal communications across half the galaxy. The message was simple: come visit sometime. We'll show you how we build instead of destroy. The old warrior looked at his audience one final time. I never went. I couldn't face her after what we'd done. But I kept the invitation. Because I finally understood the difference between us and them. His words echoed through the cantina like a judgment. We fight to conquer. They fight to protect. We create enemies. They create family. Asterisk, asterisk, the end asterisk, asterisk.